Russians have expended between 30 and 60,000 lives dead and seriously injured to retake a town, or sorry, to take a town of 60,000 people. So when you say they're making progress or they're winning, it is at an extraordinarily slow rate, and it would take them several more years to regain the Donbass territory, which, for those who don't know their Ukrainian geography, is the combination of two counties, Donetsk and Lugansk. So when you say winning, you are, and I'm not saying there's any malign motive
No, I
in
was
Carol
questioning you
saying,
about it because that is the perception, isn't it?
but that's the propaganda that's now being pumped out from the Russians.
Bob Seeley, he's a former Conservative MP. He was on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. He's also the author of The New Total War, Russia's Conflict with Ukraine and the West. Good evening to you, Bob.
Hi, Carol, and good evening to your audience.
Let me ask you first of all about the news we've heard today that a member of the British Armed Forces has died in Ukraine while watching the testing of a new defensive capability. The Ministry of Defence saying he was injured in an accident while away from the front lines. Are you surprised to hear that we have British forces so close to the military front lines in Ukraine?
Well, we don't know he was close to the military front lines, and in the statement it said that he was a long way from the military front lines. So one shouldn't make a link that's not necessarily there. It's been an open secret that there are UK military forces in Ukraine, getting on with the job of supporting the Ukrainians. So that's sort of been known for some time, and I'm very sorry to hear that a member of the UK Armed Forces has died here. Being in the UK Armed Forces, as I was, is not without its risk, and there's always a risk of injury or death. And I'm very sorry to hear it happen.
We were hearing there from Peter Westmacott about this latest round of these negotiations. I know you're speaking to us actually from Ukraine. Do you think that there is a real concern there, and perhaps that should be shared across Europe and here in Britain, that when the Ukrainians come up with their new version of this plan, and again, we haven't got the details of that, that President Trump is unlikely to accept it unless President Putin does, which is clearly pretty unlikely?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with some of what Sir Peter said and disagree with other bits, but I think Putin's aims here is not primarily to get a peace deal. If he can get the whole of Donbass handed to him, including a great deal of territory that he hasn't conquered, he might consider taking that and stopping the war for a bit. Or the physical elements of the warfare for a bit. But I think Putin's his aim here is to divide Europe and the US, to demoralize Ukrainian troops. And I had supper with some soldiers just an hour or so ago, and their attitude is that if you're on the front line and you're hearing that the war may end, you're more likely, frankly, to desert as a result of that. So the Russians are playing this very skillfully. They know that they're demoralizing the Ukrainians with these peace talks. They're trying to divide opinion here. They're dividing opinion within the United States. They're dividing opinion between the Trump administration and the European Union. And they're playing a very, very clever, very cynical game. And it's what I talk about in the book, and thank you for mentioning it. It's about how you integrate military and non-military tools of conflict to drive your aims forward.
And isn't part of the problem here, Bob, that, as you say, President Putin will be absolutely delighted, won't he, to hear President Trump criticising European allies. And this comes at a time that Russian forces are gradually gaining territory. Isn't the problem here that Russia has got the upper hand in this war, and that is going to make it even more likely that President Trump's going to accept President Putin's demands?
Okay, let's be very, very careful. When you're saying gradually winning, they are winning, if that is the correct expression, at a very, very slow rate. There was a town here called Pokrovsk, which has been besieged in eastern Ukraine for the best part of a year. The Russians have expended between 30 and 60,000 lives dead and seriously injured to take a town of 60,000 people. So when you say they're making progress or they're winning, it is at an extraordinarily slow rate, and it would take them several more years to regain the Donbass territory, which, for those who don't know their Ukrainian geography, is the combination of two counties, Donetsk and Lugansk. So when you say winning, you are, and I'm not saying there's any malign motive
No, I
in
was
Carolyn
questioning you
saying,
about it because that is the
no,
perception, isn't it?
but that's the propaganda that's now being pumped out from the Russians that their victory is inevitable, therefore the Ukrainians should cave, therefore the Ukrainians should give in, therefore the Ukrainians should give up territory, give up sovereignty, give up an armed force, etc. This is simply lining up a next round of war in a year or two or three, or just after Trump leaves the White House. So the rate of so-called victory is so slow as to arguably be a defeat. Because if you have to expend tens of thousands of lives for every small town you take, then actually victory and defeat look like very similar things.
We'll have to leave it there. Bob Seeley, it's been great to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight from Ukraine. Bob Seeley is a former Conservative MP. He's also a former soldier and author of The New Total War, Russia's Conflict with Ukraine and the West. You're listening to Carol Walker on Times Radio.
A little boy and a 4-month-old little girl. And the other day I was reading my...
Do you have any reaction on the fine that was imposed to X by the European
For
Union?
what?
To X, to the platform X, the fine
Wow,
that the
that
European
was
Union
pretty
imposed.
amazing. You're talking about, is that European Union or is it, who did that? European Union or UK?
Yeah, the European Commission.
Whoa, that's a nasty one.
Do
I
you
don't
consider it an attack?
Elon has not called me to ask for help on that one. But no, that's a tough thing. I don't think it's right. No, I don't think it's right. I don't see, how they can do that. No, I'm not. I'll speak about it later. I'm going to get a full report on it. Look, Europe has to be very careful. They're doing a lot of things. We want to keep Europe. Europe is going in some bad directions. It's very bad for the people. We don't want Europe to change so much. They're going in some very bad directions. That was a big thing. Mm-hmm. It takes them 2 minutes to do it. They do it. Mm-hmm. Very tough. No good.
How are you? Lots of Christmas trees.
How it can be directly?
Are you coming to European Council?
We are understood.
Avete fatto?